Hi, I'm Rachel Meliotis, a senior editor with O'Reilly, and it's OSCON 2013. I'm here with Chris DiBona. He is director of open source at Google. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So for those of us that can't make it to your session, tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about.
Well, you know, it's funny because I used to have it just be about what Google's done over the years, over the last year in open source, but over the last 2 or 3 years here at OSCON, I decided to add an update for the Summer of Code in our high school program, Google Code-In, as well as the Git and Garrett update from Sean. So a lot of people don't know this, but all but 2 of the main Git maintainers work for me in our open source office.
Oh, wow.
So whenever you're using Git from, say, GitHub or wherever you might use Git, you're actually using software written in our team. And so Sean brings people up to date on sort of the changes that have come upon Git, and specifically the kind of changes that we've needed to see from Git in response to the demands on Android's repositories. So basically we deploy all the infrastructure for Android and a number of its partners. And the demand on that code is actually quite high, especially as we have new revisions to the operating system. So we'll often peak at 4 times typical traffic at, say, a GitHub or something like that, just for Android alone, because it's so big and it's so sort of punctuated equilibrium in how it releases. So that has led to some really amazing performance increases in Git itself. So for instance, and I think we talked about this last year, we had implemented these new changes to how Git decides which software to send over the wire. And we had, I think it was a 70,000 time improvement in latency and deciding. Because to make the decision as to what code you should get from the last time you got code, it's a fairly complex one, right? Because they say, okay, give me every change since this cut of Android or whatever. And then Git crunches through all of that data. Well, we figured out ways of caching that data, so we could then give you the smallest, fastest packet of information that would bring you up to date again. And it's been remarkable. And we're starting to see this filter out, because it's obviously part of the normal C Git server now. It just takes a little while for everyone to adopt it, like GitHub to adopt it and other people to adopt it. And it's not because they don't want to adopt it, because everyone wants this patch, because it reduces the amount of CPU time you need to spend on a given change list. But it just takes time to integrate. So, you know, people will often lag as much as a year or more if they use libgit 2, for instance, which doesn't have a lot of this stuff. But Sean talks about this in the session.
Interesting.
So people who really care about the future of Git will come to my talk to see Sean talk, not to see me, but to see Sean.
So tell me also, you mentioned Google Summer of Code and the Code-In. Tell me about each of those projects. So
Summer of Code is our yearly project. We're on our 9th year. Next year is our 10th. And what we do is we have, I'll walk you through it. We pick open source organizations to take part, like the Apache Software Foundation, Python, SUSE, Fedora, you name it, right? And then students all over the world apply to take part in those projects under the observation of a mentor. And there's a number of ideas published by the projects that they can just say, okay, well, I'm going to implement that idea or that feature or that whatever. And then of the 6,000 or so people who apply, we pick, this year we picked 1,192 of them to be paired up with these mentors worldwide. And then they work on this project with them over the summer. And if they're successful, they collect a total of $5,000 from Google, and it helps sort of them get through the summer, so they don't have to go and get like a job that isn't coding.
Do you find that the people want to be mentors or looking to help the...
Yes, yes. And in fact, almost to the point where they get burned out a little bit, so we try not to overburden them. In our experience, anything more than about 2 students per mentor, it's a bit much. With their other demands on their time still existing, right? We had one project that would often take 10 to 1, and that was Nmap, but that was a very special case, and he did a great job with it. But usually 2 or 3 to 1 is awful. That's a lot. And also, for first-year projects that have never done Summer of Code before, and first-year mentors, I usually recommend 1 to 1. That way it doesn't get too hard and burn them out. Because we want them to have a good experience with the program too, you know, not just the students. And getting used to running neophyte developers remotely can be very difficult. So, So that's Summer of Code, and they take about 1,192 students that way, of which will fail 14, 15% of them, you know. And failing just means they didn't make the goals of their program. And often that's because life intervenes more than anything else.
Yep.
It's funny because you'd think, oh yeah, because during the earthquake, da-da-da-da. It's never been natural disasters that derail projects. It's always just like people didn't realize how much work it was, or they decided they wanted to take an internship at the same time,
Right.
and they couldn't do both. And
Life gets in the way.
Life gets in the way. But is there any life other than open source? I don't know. Yeah, so that's Summer of Code. And then Google Code-In is a way we lead into the Summer of Code. So if you're 13 to 18, and Summer of Code is 18 and up in university, but if you're 13 to 18 in a high school and you want to start dipping your toe in development and open source software, we basically have with our mentoring organization partners scads of small tasks that you can do. And it allows people to get introduced to open source in a very gentle way and a very productive way. And it's more than just coding tasks. There's also documentation tasks and that kind of thing. So we end up having, really a great number of tasks completed. I think we had over 2,000 tasks completed last winter.
Wow.
So, and we do that it's the antipode to Summer of Code. We have the winter of high school students kind of thing. And it works out really well.
So how do they find out about something like that?
Well, what's funny about it, we have spent not a lick of time marketing this. So
really? So people want it?
It's funny. For the high school programs and the college programs, sometimes they'll learn from teachers. Sometimes they'll learn from programming communities on Reddit or Hacker News or whatever their local language one is. In Sri Lanka, there's a university that's crazy about the Summer of Code, and so I think they practically make it an obligation of any computer science student to take part. We had 75 people from Sri Lanka taking part, and this was during the Civil War there too, mind you. That there were Tamils and Sri Lankans both working on projects, even side by side.
Wow.
So it was it's pretty amazing.
So do you find that a lot of the high schoolers kind of go from Code-In to Summer of Code?
That's a good question. I don't have the data at hand. I would assume so.
I would think they would.
And in fact, what ends up happening sometimes is people come to us and they're like, I really want to do Summer of Code, and we're like, you're 12, you're 13, you're 14. We can't because of the way that international law works in paying people. But we do have this other thing, the Google Code-In, which is not as monetarily focused.
Right.
Although what we do at the end of Google Code-In is we'll pick the 22 top students. Actually, our mentoring partners pick them, and then we fly them and one parent or guardian to Google, and we take them around. We introduce them to computer science the way we think about it, and it's really pretty exciting. And the parents are always just Google-eyed.
Yeah, right. I'm always surprised younger and younger kids know how to program or know the concepts. Have you ever considered even going lower in age?
So we've thought about it. Honestly, the really big barrier there is just the online protection laws,
sure,
the child labor laws, and the rest. So we just can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
It was so hard to create a structure that would even suffice for 13 to 18-year-olds that the idea of getting below that just melts my brain. I help out at my daughter's school and their programming sort of directions and the rest, and it's amazing to see what's been going on. So she's 12, and kids her age who are exposed to computer science early, which she was, by 7th grade, they're ready for Python. Some have already started programming some Python.
I believe it.
It's pretty amazing. And it's funny because if you look over the last 5 years, I would have said 7th grade, they're pretty solidly into Scratch and they're learning a lot from Scratch. Now Scratch is done 4th grade.
I know. It's pretty amazing.
It is amazing.
It's encouraging.
Yeah. No.
And so, actually going along with that, you've been in open source for a while.
Yes.
So
I am an old man.
Yes. Well, no.
See the grading.
But how would you like to see sort of open source and the community around it evolve, in the next 5 years, 10 years?
So one thing I would really like to see, I would like to see more people along the Pacific Rim taking part in the open community. So one of the things we see is we don't see a lot of giving back or taking part in China and India proportional to their usage of open source. And the number of computer scientists they have in those countries.
Interesting.
In Korea and Japan, we see it, but they remain insular. And I don't know if that's some latent cultural bias on Western society's parts or not, but if I had to make a prediction over the next 10 years, is that we'll see a lot more APAC contributions. And in Europe and America, I would really hope that some of our efforts around bringing more women into computer science and into open source bears more fruit. We try to sponsor women-specific programs as well as try to do whatever we can to welcome them into Summer of Code and the rest.
Sure.
It's extremely challenging. I'd like to tell you that, and I can tell you that in the summer of Code and Google Code-In, we're seeing higher levels of participation by women than we ever have before.
Good.
And higher than you normally see in open source projects. And my goal would be parity, just parity with normal computer science roles. That would be pretty amazing in open source, just to get to parity.
Sure.
And then meanwhile, work on increasing the presence of women in computer science, period.
Sure.
It's something we also work on at Google, but also through our office in small ways. In Google in big ways through a lot of our diversity programs and our university relations team. But yeah, it's something I would like to see a lot more of.
Awesome.
And it's funny because people then say, well, what's your strategy to get more? I don't have a good answer. I'm more of a direct person.
Sure.
And so people are like, well, if you want to have more women computer scientists in your company, what do? Well, you hire more women computer scientists.
Yeah.
So how do you get there?
Yeah, exactly.
And that gets a little more challenging. But yeah, I've talked with there's a diversity specialist at MIT in their computer science department. And she and I talked recently about like sort of ratios and how it's going. And honestly, I think the financial meltdown of 2008 brought more women back into computer science who had been diverted into the investment banking realm in sort of the high-end American university population. And worldwide, it's a whole different problem. So.
Well, this has been fascinating.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for everything that
Sure.
you're doing for the
Absolutely.
community.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining me today.
Anytime.